to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. There's a few things I want to kind of dive into. One being Illinois and the little situation therein. Pretty interesting. Kind of one of those we told you so, but we really don't want it to be a we told you so. We want it to be like, now let's kind of fix this way of thinking that this actually works. But we'll get into that. I also I kind of want to talk about the little election that happened in Georgia, and what's going to come out of that. Now, one thing I do want to get into is this Ron Paul Liberty Report. I listened to this and it really got me, thinking about some of the issues that are brought up into this. And I was reading some other articles and stuff, and it'll come full circle definitely towards the end of the broadcast. But I want to go ahead and get into this. This was Ron Paul Liberty Report, Mythbusters, America's Moral Hazard Disorder.
Thank you for tuning in today. This is Friday, and this is the day we do Mythbusters. Our co-host is Chris Rossini. And Chris, welcome to the program today.
Hello, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Good. What is going to be our subject?
Well, today we're going to talk about, an error that many Americans make, and that's to believe that government is there to prevent us from making mistakes and shield us from risk. And their policies, when they implement them, actually create more risk and reckless risk-taking and something called moral hazard. So we'll talk about today, and we'll start with probably the biggest one because it affects every one of us, and that's the FDIC. So if you could start by talking about why the FDIC was created and how it led to big risk-taking with the banks and moral hazard.
Well, it was created after it was realized the Federal Reserve was very inefficient. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. They inflated to fight the war in World War I, And then there was a boom in the 20s, and then that ushered in the Depression, and everybody knew, well, the Fed's not doing that great a job. There are ups and downs before due to statewide and local inflation. But here it was done nationally, and then they had a lot bigger problem than they realized. So one of the very first things that Roosevelt did in 1933, June 1933, that's just a couple months after he was sworn in, he started the FDIC, and that is to try to cover up the mistakes. They didn't try to say, well, why are there mistakes? Why is there a malinvestment? Why is there too much debt? Why does there have to be corrections? Instead of saying that, they said, well, we have to have the Fed because they're the lender of last resort, and they have to protect the banks and the business people, and that's why we have the Fed. But since it didn't work too well and people would have runs on the bank, they had to reassure the individual depositors and the bankers, of course, and protect them and say that, well, we're going to give you insurance. So if the bank runs out of money, which they always do, technically speaking, with fractional reserve, because there's always demands 3 or 4 or 5 times for the same dollar that's in the bank. So it doesn't make any sense unless you fool the people. Well, the people weren't fooled, and that's why they went to get their money out of the bank in the Depression, but they didn't want it to happen again, so they were trying to protect it. So they invented this thing called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it does pace things over a bit, but what it does is just prolongs the need for the correction, and we've been living that way ever since until we've gotten to this point where the FDIC has done a relatively decent job in guaranteeing deposits, but they guarantee the malinvestment, the debt, and the problems just keeping worse, and here we are, huge deficits that we finance in this manner, and we do this with, it's essentially no interest at all, and everything is insured, and people are pleased. But what they can't do is insure value when they go back in and take the money. It might not be worth as much. But then again, it really doesn't even protect the people that it's supposed to protect. It protects the banks and business people because the process continues. But we know so clearly from this last recession that the average person was really hurt. They lost their mortgages, lost their houses, and lost their jobs. So they were hurt to a great deal, and yet we have nearly half of our population that are not gainfully employed. Oh, yes, the unemployment rate is low, very low, but we have 100 million people out of the workforce. So the problems are out there, and all one has to do is read the business news and realize how many people really, how precarious a situation we have. But it's this illusion that there's insurance. The government ensures that something will be there. Well, the only way you can have real market insurance is, first, you have to have a sound currency, and the people have to, if you're going to use substitutes for gold, the banks have to hold the gold. And, of course, they have to be trustworthy. It has to be there. So that would be one way to do it. The other thing is in a free market, you would probably have private insurance, and the private insurance company would come in and say, this bank is sound. They have reserves there, and it's safe to invest there, but it would be a business decision by an insurance company that's, reputation is online. And if they give that a stamp of approval, then the customers would think that's going to be a lot better than if the government gives the stamp of approval. Just recently, the banks did this major yearly review of to find out, it was the stress test, to find out if the banks are really doing this. And they all pass with flying colors, with the assumption, of course, that if problems come in, what they hold in reserves is nothing compared to what the demands would be. But once again, it's the guarantee. The government will print the money and insure everybody. It doesn't work. It's not working. And yet they live in this dreamland that is the solution to the Federal Reserve's mistake, is just give government insurance, which is based on fraud.
Right. The next assurances that government makes, whether it be medical or even flood, we'll talk about the flood part. Let's say you live in Florida or Louisiana and you take a risk and build a house on the water right where the hurricanes will come in. And if something happens, the people all the way across the country via federal aid in like Maine or something have to pick up the bill for your risk. Is this a right way to live, Dr. Paul?
No, it's the wrong way. It encourages bad behavior and taking risk. That the person who built the house is not at risk, but the people who don't get to build it, are at risk. And these, for the most part, these are people to buy property right on the beach is expensive. So, high-income people get protected by low-income people who have to pay this off if there is a flood. And what happens is there's more building done where they shouldn't be building. If it were private insurance, they would say, and this is the reason they had a government insurance, flood insurance, and windstorm insurance, is because the rates were too high. Well, the rates were high because it was dangerous. So if the government does it, they lower it and people build and they make it worse because more concrete gets put down, the floods get worse. And so they encourage this behavior. And then they come in and they say, oh, we've bailed you out twice, 2, 3 times. So you're not doing right. So what we need are more regulations. We need to regulate mortgage companies, and we need to tell where the builders can do and all the development. So the federal government comes in, and they use that as an excuse to do, all the regulating to try to iron out the problems of making the mistake of a guaranteed insurance program. But that is not insurance. They're eliminating the principle of risk, whether it's flood or windstorm or medical care or whatever. It's not measuring risk. Matter of fact, it distorts it where risk is not a problem. The risk becomes not the person having the house. They're not at risk. There's still the risk that is passed on to somebody else. So the person who acts out and builds these houses or gets the medical insurance or whatever, it is not insurance. It's welfare. And they'd be better off if they just admitted it was welfare rather than saying, well, this is insurance, and we'll tell the insurance company what they have to insure. So, for the most part, I live on the Gulf Coast, and we do know that this, matter of fact, it's just the tropical storm just went in, not too far from us. Could have been a hurricane, but you can't wait until the week the hurricane comes in and say, oh, looks like a hurricane out there, I'm going to go buy my insurance. They at least say, well, you have to get it, before that. But on medicine, the whole issue, the big fight going on with Obamacare now is who's going to take care of people who have had prior conditions. Well, that's a problem that comes from how insurance is manipulated and paid for through the tax code, and business people get the tax deduction. So they mess the whole thing up, but then they put the burden on the insurance companies that you have to take care of anybody, even if they're 32 years old, never had insurance, and they come down with cancer. Well, I need insurance. And they go out and they have to give them insurance. Of course, Obamacare tried to correct that by taking young people who shouldn't have to pay so much on insurance and pays huge amounts. And then it comes up with this silly notion that people who don't use drugs have to pay for the treatment of people who do use drugs. People who are 65, 70 years old, people who aren't having children have to pay OB care. It just, one problem leads to another. One regulation usually creates 2 new problems, and they never stop and say, something is wrong here. No, they just come off and they argue about what regulation should be put on. So it's a very dangerous situation just because they accept this principle that government insurance can substitute for what they're doing. But it's not insurance. It's just government intervention to cover up the mistakes that they themselves have created, whether it's monetarily or some type of government program. This is certainly what happened in the housing program. We had, so much money printed, and interest rates were so low. Everybody deserves a house. We had a Community Reinvestment Act. We built the bubble, and then the insurance would be there. And, of course, the mortgage holders got bailed out and the banks got bailed out, except there were some people who suffered the consequence of this. The market is not perfect. Insurance is very important. A market can't work without the benefit of a true insurance policy that, can scientifically, in a way, measure risk. And they have to cover themselves, and that's why they have to have cooperations among insurance companies to cover everybody. But that's been worked out, but we're totally destroying this. And the bigger the economy gets and the more intervention it is, the more risk there is. So the more government you have to protect it. It was a guarantee about student loans. Oh, yeah, you're going to get a good education. You can pay this back. It turned out that the education wasn't worth much and there weren't any jobs. Now there's $1.3 trillion and it's all been guaranteed and somebody would pay for it. But it's not going to be the students that own this. They're already not paying the bills. So somebody's going to suffer. But that much money wouldn't have been loaned if it hadn't been made available. So the moral hazard was making this money available and guaranteeing these loans to the people who are making these loans. So there will be some bailouts, but it's best government stay out of the business of making economic decisions.
The next group that loves government assurances and insurances are crony corporations, politically connected corporations, not legitimate entrepreneurs out there, but those who get close to government. And they seek to new markets overseas or even at home. And if things go well, they profit. But if things don't go well, they also have their government and taxpayer at their back. So if you could talk about that, and the Export-Import Bank comes to mind, and if you could explain how that leads to moral hazard.
Yes, the whole financial system is based on protecting big corporations and the big banks to encourage them to take risk because the Fed will come to their rescue. They do this by printing a lot of money and keeping interest rates low and having the lender of last resort there to protect. And in the meantime, they can make profits and stash them away someplace, maybe overseas or who knows where, and have huge salaries. The biggest problem what I see with this is that it's corrupt, but free market are blamed for this. They say, oh, it's capitalism that's doing this. It's free markets. And you hear the socialists just chiming in. This is what these libertarians want. No, it's not what we want, because this is crony capitalism. And they want more of this because they're always arguing for this case. The Ex-Im Bank is a big boondoggle for big business because you literally subsidize exports. Well, that's good. That's good for business people and good for union high-paying jobs, and that happens. But it's artificial. It's artificial. It doesn't put pressure on our companies to be the most competitive. And they say, well, other countries do that and they subsidize it. Well, if they're going to subsidize the competition, that means the people there will suffer. But the Export-Import Bank is one. But there's another one. That's just, in a way, not quite as bad as OPIC, which is the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Ex-Im at least says we're trying to export something, but it's artificial and we shouldn't do it. But OPIC is a guarantee that if you go overseas and start a business and there's economic and political problems, your company can get insured by the American taxpayer if they run into trouble. And of course, if we have an investments in country, we usually send our military, notoriously in Central America and around the world. That's why our military exists many times, is to protect our national interests. Well, their financial interests is what they are. So that process, continues. But there's tremendous benefits with this system because, of contracts. They get many type of contracts, not only military contracts, but the various contracts, and these are all guaranteed by government. That is the reason why this system is, incestuous in the manner that all big business and banks are really running the show, and the little guy gets a bad deal. And that's why we're in the mess we're in today, because I think it's safe to say that half the people in this country are having a lot of problems. They don't have enough income to rent their houses and this sort of thing, even though the statistics they pour out says, oh, everything is rosy, there's no unemployment and that sort of thing. But no, I think the problems come from this whole idea that there should be no risk. Everybody should have an easy time. The government is there to take care of us. They can stimulate things. They can turn inflation off when we need to. One thing they have found out, though, in the last 8 years, they can't turn it on when the market's not ready for it. And no matter how $4 trillion we've created, and zero interest rates hasn't stimulated the economy. So they should wake up and say, there's something seriously wrong with our monetary and our economic policies.
Yes, finally, let's talk about an idea that's been percolating for decades on the left, and they're just always pushing for it. And sometimes you'll see a tech billionaire come out in support of it. And that's a universal basic income is what they call it. Basically, that the government should provide an income for everybody, no matter what, just because they're breathing. If you could please explain how this is a breeding ground for moral hazard to close our show.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But we have to admit, this is already going on. If you don't work right now, you can get food stamps, you can get housing assistance, you can get welfare benefits, you can get Medicaid. So there is a minimum guarantee, so we already have that problem. But and it's always pretty impressive that the billionaires come along and say that we have to do this. I think there might be a little bit of guilt with these billionaires, but, well, we're so rich, but we better look at least like we really care about people, and there seems like a lot of wealth, so we'll just do this. But no, I think it's a gross distortion. It just encourages people to do more of the wrong thing. But let's say you give a guaranteed income, I'll just throw out a number, $1,000 a month to live. And people say, oh, that's good, I can live on that. Well, what happens to the jobs that a person could make $800 a month, and we had no inflation, we had a sound economy? Who would work for $800 a month and lose their $1,000 benefit? So you'd have to have technology really energetic to replace those people who won't work, at $800. So it distorts things. And this is the problem. This guaranteed business of safety, the guarantee that you can always be taken care of. I think it goes over into the social things too. People want a guarantee that they are never insulted. They want protection in a social way. We can't say, if you say anything, you can be in trouble. So it is this socioeconomic Marxism that we're facing, and it created a lot of mess. And everything that is done in the name of this perfect safety and perfect protection is done in the name of tyranny, tyrants, people wanting to take care of things, authoritarianism. But if they want to look to what the opposite should be, is what we like to advocate, and that is free markets, individual freedom and liberty. And if you want guaranteed, not guaranteed, but if you want insurance, a much better insurance in a marketplace, you need to have gold as money. Now, that's freedom that could protect you. And you need free market insurance rates that measure risk. But individuals will iron out the difficulties, and we will not prop up the bad people. So I think this is an important issue, and I think the problem is going to be around a while. But this system that we have currently, I think, is coming to an end, and we're going to have an opportunity to bring some common sense to people because right now it's pretty disgusting what is happening. But anyway, Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with us today on Mythbusters.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in to this program, and I invite you to come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. One thing I wanted to talk about was Illinois, and let me get these. Hold on, sorry. Okay. One of the articles is covering an order that the judge has made. I don't know if this one wants to pop up. Sorry. And of course, it's working. Okay, I'll read this article right here out of Fox News. I also had up. Um, this one's titled, and of course, it's Fox News, so we will take it as a right leaning um, news organization. So, Illinois careens into financial meltdown, and not even the lottery is safe. Says here, Illinois is grappling with a full-fledged financial crisis, and not even the lottery is safe, with Republican Governor Bruce Rauner warning the state is entering banana republic territory. Facing billions in unpaid bills and pension obligations, the state is hitting a cash crunch that is rare even by Illinois standards. A top financial official just warned 100% of the state's monthly revenue will be eaten up by court ordered payments. Rauner is calling a special session of the Democrat led General Assembly in a bid to pass what he hopes will be the first full um, budget package in almost 3 years. And Illinois will literally lose the lottery if the budget fails. The state lotto requires a payment from the legislator each year. The current appropriation expires June 30th, meaning no authority to pay prizes in anticipation of a budget deadlock. The state already is planning to halt Powerball and Mega Millions sales. It is disappointing that the legislators' inability to pass a budget has led to this development and will result in Illinois lottery players being denied the opportunity to play these popular games, Illinois Lottery Acting Director Greg Smith told Fox News. We are like a banana republic, Rauner said earlier this month after the General Assembly failed yet again to pass a budget package by the regular session deadline. We can't manage our money. The government has called for a special session starting Wednesday. The state so far is operating on a series of stopgap spending packages, but the problems are years in the making, caused in large in part by the state's poorly funded pension system, which led Moody's Investors Services to downgrade the credit rating to the lowest of any state. The state currently has $130 billion in unfunded pension obligations and a backlog of unpaid bills worth $13 billion. Reports have suggested this, the state could be the first to attempt to declare Chapter 9 bankruptcy, but under the law, that's impossible unless Congress gets involved. Nobody here in Illinois is considering bankruptcy, first of all. It's not allowed, said Steve Brown, press secretary for Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. Second of all, it would damage the reputation of the state, and it's just not necessary. U.S. Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, both Democrats from Illinois, declined to respond to Fox News' request for comment on whether they would consider getting involved in introducing a measure allowing state bankruptcy. Um, Illinois is a fiscal model of what not to do. Representative Peter Roscom, Republican from Illinois, told Fox News. While not commenting on the bankruptcy question, this avoidance and behavior towards dealing with our challenges is what leads to the devastating impacts we are seeing today. Just last week, the Illinois uh, comptroller, who is responsible for paying the state's bills, warned the office would be paying out 100% of Illinois monthly revenue, leaving negative funds for discretionary spending. But Ronner claims the Republicans have a new plan that could remedy the state's crippling financial situation. Republicans in the General Assembly have laid out a compromise budget that I can sign, Ronner said, calling it a true compromise. The plan incorporates reforms like property tax reform, term limits, and spending caps, which have caused an ongoing confrontation between Madigan and the governor, one Republican leader told Fox News, adding that the two have been in a stalemate since Ronner took office 2 years ago. Governor Ronner inherited this financial mess when he took office, and his proposals have been met by resentment from the Speaker, Deputy House Republican leader Dan Brady said. Brady added, "We are asking that the Speaker allow for a date and a vote before June 30th. But Brown told Fox News the governor isn't making enough concessions. He's not walking many back. The financial issues are serious enough, and he's forcing things that have nothing to do with state government," Brown said. "The biggest problem here is that the governor keeps associating a lot of things that do not have anything to do with the budget. Ronner has pushed for structural reforms, government consolidation, and pension reform, some components that were able to pass on the Senate side. If they're talking about has nothing to do with that would have something to do with the budget. The people and businesses of Illinois deserve stability, not this ongoing chaos," Senate President John J. Fullerton, a Democrat, told Fox News. The Illinois State Senate approved a balanced budget before the initial May 31st deadline that matches the governor's spending proposal. If the General Assembly fails to pass a budget package, they do have the option to pass another stopgap package, which lawmakers say is an option, but not a good one. "We have a very real deadline looming," Senate Republican leader Christine Rodagno told Fox News. "The alternative to not funding a compromise will be devastating to Illinois." And that was out of foxnews.com. And I don't think a stopgap will help anything because, again, 100% of their, budget or their income is going out. And from what I understand, that's just in the court-ordered pensions. Takes 100%. So I don't see how any plan's going to fix the actual issue. They can reform it to try to make it better, and they can do a lot of cutting, but is that even going to make up for the other bills that they are now going to be court-ordered to pay? So in that, sense, they are bankrupt. They're just trying to deny that they're bankrupt. Um, I want to bring up this one article. And this one was out of the Chicago Tribune. Hopefully this video doesn't try to autoplay. Let me just make sure. I don't want this thing blasting in my ear all of a sudden. I think it will try to autoplay too. Okay. It says here, and again, this from the Chicago Tribune. What to do with a broken Illinois dissolved the land of Lincoln. And I really want to get into this because I'm being a neighboring state. I think I would know what this could mean. Illinois is like Venezuela now, a fiscal broken state that has lost its will to live. Although for the moment we will have enough toilet paper. But before we run out of the essentials, let's finally admit that after decade upon decade of taxing and spending and borrowing, Illinois has finally run out of other people's money. Those other people include taxpayers who abandoned the state, and now Illinois faces doomsday. So the politicians met in Springfield this weekend for another round of posturing and gesturing and blaming. We need a plan. And here it is. Dissolve Illinois. Decommission the state. Tear up the charter. Whatever the legal mumbo jumbo, just end the whole dang thing. We just disappear with no pain. That's right, you heard me. The best thing to do is to break Illinois into pieces right now. Just wipe us off the map, cut us out of America's heartland, and let neighboring states carve us up and take the best chunks for themselves. The group that will scream the loudest is the state's political class who did this to us, and the big bond creditors who are whispering talk of bankruptcy and asset forfeiture to save their own skins. And he has a map here. Now, I'm looking at the map, and I can't really tell if Wisconsin gets Chicago, because it shows Wisconsin coming down and taking some of the northern part, and maybe Chicago or Indiana, Chicago. But it does show Indiana taking a pretty good portion near Chicago. We don't want it. We don't want that up there. Don't give us that up there. One thing about Indiana is we are a red state. There's things that are bad because we are a red state. Medical marijuana or marijuana even at recreational use. None of that's going to probably pass anytime soon. Downfalls for a lot of people. Definitely when you see more and more states legalizing it, red states are going to be, not the ones doing that. But we firearms, firearms are a norm. Definitely when you're not in a big city. But gun shows and that stuff, it's a norm. We grew up that way. Parents grew up that way. But it says here, but our beloved Illinois has proved that it just doesn't deserve to survive. So why not let our friendly neighbors like Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, and Kentucky just take the parts they want? As you can see by the excellent um, Kevorkian, Illinois map that accompanies this column, the plan is visionary. The alternative, hell, Illinois hasn't had a state budget for years. The state continues to spend money it doesn't have, and the state's credit ratings have dropped, increasing the cost of borrowing more money. We don't have to keep the rotten um, shebang going. Bills pile up. Moody's Investor Service says taxpayers are on the hook for $251 billion in unfunded public union pension liabilities. Boss Mike Madigan, king of the Democrats who control things, wants tax increases but no real structural reform to bring stability to the Venezuela of the Midwest. And again, raising taxes from a state where people that have any money left are running from the state because of high taxes, that's not going to help you. Not going to happen. And the whispers of bankruptcy won't help the average remaining tax-paying chumblowns like you and me who don't want to leave our home, but who will get stuck with the bills. Since our neighboring states are doing better, taking Illinois jobs and businesses and Illinois workers, tax-paying families, they might as well just take the rest of Illinois too, damn it. Wisconsin can have Chicago and begin calling it South Milwaukee. Naturally, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel will fight this. He needs a job, and he'll most likely beg his friends at the New York Times and Washington Post to write angry editorials to save him. And these will be full of concern for the Republic and those dispossessed Midwestern salt of the earth taxpaying Americans, as if sadly Wisconsin probably won't want Rahm either. So to spare hurt feelings, I propose carving out 40 acres around the mayor's home so Rahm might be prince of his own country. Rahmonia. And Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle will fight it too, so she needs something to smooth her ambitions. A grant of land as large as a case of the soda pop she taxes, so that she might stand on it and proclaim herself queen of Taxwinkeltopia. And the article, you probably should read the rest of it. That's how the Chicago Tribune, what to do with a broken Illinois, dissolve the land of Lincoln. And people are actually serious about this. There's people that have seen this and we're like, what's so bad about that? Probably should, No one likes Illinois, other than a lot of elitist or, you have people that, I don't know, the trendies, I guess. You'll find a lot of trendies that like Chicago, because what they do, they go downtown, very nice area, the boardwalk, they go shop for their, Coach, bag or whatever, Louis Vuitton, whatever, and then they come back to Indiana. They love Chicago. Then why don't you live there? Oh, it's too expensive. Too expensive to pay for, these small, shiny areas to impress you. And, being in Indiana and, the KKK is headquartered in Indiana. I don't ever see KKK around, so I don't know where they're at. But you would think, okay, well, Chicago, very Louisville ran, it's probably very diverse. It's very, very diverse, yeah. Um, any of the people that I've worked with that came from Chicago, white or black, say, it's different in Indiana, you know, it's just so different, where I'm from, Chicago, it's very segregated. And you think, well, isn't this the Democrats and aren't most African American or blacks, whatever is politically correct right now, aren't they always the Democrats? The Democrats are always for the African American community. Um, you know, you would think, well, and they always say that how the Republicans are the racists. So why is it more diverse in the Republican state than in and really in a lot of the cities than it is in Chicago? Well, if you know Democratic history, what the Democrats have tried to erase from history books, at least the ones that you'll get in a public school, you find out, hey, it's the Democrats that were the racists, the KKK, all of the above. It was a Republican. Oh, yeah, Abraham Lincoln, the one that all these Democrats always talk about, was a Republican. Now, can you have people on both sides that are racist and, that way? Yeah, you can. But the power structure, where did that originally come from? It's hand movements, really, basically. Look over here, no, over here is where it's really happening. Um, when we look at how Illinois is ran, it would be hard for any state to be able to pick that up, take that responsibility when it comes to outlandish pensions. Let's say that you had 25 new employers or employees because you grew your business, you hired some more people, you got new people in, you get a couple people retiring, let's say 5 people retiring. Well, those 25 are going to basically help pay that pension for, well, it's not working. What happened? Economy sunk. Bubbles popped. So what do you have happen every time that happens? Well, now you got, 5 employees paying for 25 pensions, some of which might have been, smaller pensions because they got a deal to retire early or whatever. But they're not paying for the pensions no more. So now what happens? Well, they go, well, now we got to, take that money from that, 5 people. We need to be able to invest it and get enough return to pay for those 25 people. And from what I heard from another person was that basically they would have to, for what they owe in pensions and everything, for it to have been able to sustain itself, it would have had to been like 7.3%. and that would allow, like, or no, it was 7.5%, I think, would allow for a little bit of um, below that, maybe every few years you could have a dip below 7 if you could, average a 7.5%, investment rate. Um, Anybody that understands that knows that's not going to happen. So then a judge basically has to order them, hey, you gotta pay your bills. You owe people. If you ain't got the money, file bankruptcy. If you do pension reform, it's either going to hurt the people or it's not going to work because you didn't file bankruptcy. You're still liable for that. That only makes, all this a lot more complicated than they're really any of the lawmakers are putting out. They're trying to make it look like, oh, we'll figure this out. We'll get through this. We're not going to file bankruptcy. We're not going to do this or that. But that's not totally true. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Okay. Sorry, it's not wanting to pop up here. What's going on? Okay. Maybe I'll just go to the clip first. Figure out what the hell's going on here. Alright. Am I even still connected to you? Yep, okay. So connect on Skype. Okay. I got it now. I'm gonna play this clip first, and I want to discuss some of this because it really plays into what we're gonna face here in the future. And this will go into what we're gonna see after this Georgia election. I'll talk about the whole Georgia special election here, and after this clip, once I get it back up on my screen. Um, but this is from Reason TV. This is college students think freedom is not a big deal, and what it spells for upcoming elections. That's what I'm going to get into. But what college students are thinking right now. Reason TV. Let's get into it.
about is the fact that within universities, a very illiberal ethos has become institutionalized, where for the first time, a growing number of young people actually think that freedom is not a big deal.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV. Today we are talking with Frank Ferretti. He's an emeritus professor at the University of Kent, a sociologist, and the author of most recently, What's Happened to the University, a sociological exploration of its infantilization. Frank, thanks for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Okay, so what is so bad about the university right now? What's the thesis of the book?
I think what the book suggests is that there was a time when universities were a place where you could spontaneously interact, where free speech, academic freedom were really valued. As a place of experimentation and risk-taking, where you could really go to the edge of the world, look over the cliff, and just basically make things happen. Whereas today, what has happened is that, in many respects, the university has become far more sort of conservative, far more restrictive, far more inward-looking, and very, very liberal. So in many respects, it's easier to speak about controversial subjects outside of the university than inside the university. It's a historical role reversal where the university has become far more censorious than the rest of society, and that's something I find very troubling.
Is the entire university being infantilized, or is it students, and what are the causes of that?
Well, what I mean by infantilization is a situation where the line that used to exist between high school and university has become eroded, where young men and young women coming to university regard themselves and are treated as if they were biologically mature children, where there's a powerful impulse towards paternalism, where you look after 18, 19, 21-year-olds instead of allowing them to make their way in the world. And the whole of the whole of the teaching profession has almost reorganized its pedagogy around the assumption that essentially you're dealing with clever children rather than with independently minded young men and young women. I think that's what I mean by infantilization.
What are the causes driving that? Because it's so 18-year-olds, when they show up, or 17, 18, 19-year-olds, they're no longer treated as adults. They're still treated as children. Why is that?
Well, what I argue is that in many respects, where the problem really lies is in the failure of adult society to socialize young people, to educate them for freedom and independence, where historically in America or in England, young people were socialized into values about what is right and what is wrong, the importance of freedom, of self-reliance, of responsibility, a whole set of values. And even if the kids didn't really live up to, they knew that these were aspirationally quite important. And as a result of that, when you're 14 or 15 or 16, you were dying to become a grown-up. You kind of pretended to be a young man or a young woman. And whereas today, I think what we've done is, instead of socializing people into values, we rely on psychological techniques as a substitute.
So what does that mean? Yeah.
That means, for example, that parents are told not to criticize their children, but instead to smile at them. So when kids do something wrong, you don't say you've been a bad person, but this is a bad sort of act that was carried out. You kind of turn into a psychologist, as a mother or a father, and you regard your child as a patient, because the conviction is that children are so powerless and fragile that unless you emotionally support them, raise their self-esteem, they're going to have long-term damage to their self-esteem and to their psyche. And what's even worse, the schools carry on doing that. And if you look at the system of education that has evolved, it's got a pedagogy that's really about, sort of validating them, making them feel good about themselves, very rarely criticizing them, minimizing the pressure that they're under, making sure they're not too competitive against each other. And as a result of that, what happens is that the kids are quarantined from the pressures of everyday life.
Is that true at all levels of class, or are we talking, first off, universities, I mean, about 2/3 or a little bit more than 2/3 of high school students in America go on to some form of college immediately. I suspect it's about the same or maybe a little bit lower in England. But is this in all classes, or is this really, are we talking about rich people who are afraid that their kids can't make the grade, so they want to get rid of those kinds of judgments?
Well, as you're suggesting, a lot of these customs begin in the more sort of wealthy, affluent areas of society. They're the ones that innovated the ideas of new forms of sensitivity training, of bringing in emotional literacy. So it's really a set of practices that begins amongst a small section of society. But over 25, 30 years, it gradually filters down. So that in more recent decades, particularly since the turn of the 21st century, even people coming from less wealthy backgrounds become influenced by this. And parents who come from working class backgrounds begin to internalize or are under pressure to internalize these forms of behavior. If you look at a typical parenting class that is given to working class or very poor people, the workshops for parents are all about making them into amateur therapists who are going to then, sort of make sure that the emotions.
So you're calling for parents to hit their children? That's what I'm hearing. Or to be harsh on them and things like that.
I, what I'm arguing for is that bringing kids up is a relationship. It's a relationship between a mother and a father and a child. You're going to make a lot of mistakes in the course of bringing your kids up, and you're going to learn from those mistakes. And the child will also learn that moms and dads do things that are unexpected or wrong. But in the course of doing that, the child becomes stronger. And I think your job as a parent is to encourage their independence, to provide them with the support they need to stand on their 2 feet, to make the judgment calls, where occasionally you allow them to take risks, even though you know that it's possible that they may graze their knees and they might get into trouble. But instead of immunizing them from the pressures of everyday life, your job is to actually make sure that they become strong as soon as possible.
So, in a kind of contemporary American debate, a lot of the times, college is treated as that's a stage that people come to, and whatever is happening there is because of what's happening on the campus. You're essentially arguing that if you're focusing on college, you're missing where all of this stuff is actually coming from. So you could be treating the symptom, but not the cause.
That's right. At the same time, although, as I argue, almost all the developments to do with people's sort of physical and moral behavior occurs a long time before they go to university. Nevertheless, the universities are really important indirectly, because we have to remember that universities now are a massive institution. For example, the universities influence the values of the teaching profession. So all the schools are inhabited by people who've gone to university themselves, who've internalized the kind of values and practices that are popular in universities. They also influence a very large section of society who are parents, because a lot of parents, a growing number of parents, have gone to college themselves. So indirectly, the values that are created and constructed within the university environment are, I would argue, the most powerful drivers of socialization.
Are they? Is there an ideological basis in that, or is this kind of a blind procession of, well, the people at university or in education schools or in psychology, they just think they're doing things right? Or is it that they have a particular ideology that they're trying to impart?
Well, I suppose you could say there's an ideological element, as long as you see ideology with a small I. In other words, it's not a political ideology that's being promoted, but, for example, a lot of the teaching profession or the people getting involved in social work learn very, very fast that their job is really to save children from their parents, that their job is to make sure that these fairly thick, stupid parents who are completely insensitive to the needs of their child somehow get the skills from them that's necessary to bring those kinds of kids up. So there's a kind of mission there that's promoted. So the vocation of teaching and social work and other helping professions do have an ideological underpinning, but it's not a left-wing or a right-wing or a liberal ideology. It's simply a particular orientation towards the human self.
Where do we see the negative effects? I mean, you say, okay, let's grant that children and young adults or society is becoming more infantilized. Actual adults, 20 people in their 20s are being treated like children. What's the harm in that? In the sense of, crime in most places is down. People live longer. They seem to be about as happy as they've ever been. Is there something wrong with that?
Well, not necessarily, because I know in my case, myself and all my friends did everything possible to delay growing up and having fun. And Nobody wanted to turn into a gray-suited, sort of office worker at the age of 21. You wanted to explore the world and you wanted to make things happen. So all those aspirations are entirely positive. I'm not really against that. But what I'm talking about is something a little bit different. It's not about an aspiration to experiment, to take risks, and to avoid responsibility in order to do something transformative or interesting. It's basically an avoidance of growing up in order to stay still and to avoid the pressures that come with becoming an older person. And I think that where you can see the downside of this are developments like the fact that in the Western world, people living at home are the fastest growing demographic group. You have situations in Japan where leaving home is seen as almost an impossible ask for many, many young people. I've done interviews with young men and young women in England who are late 20s, early 30s, come from very relatively affluent backgrounds. And when I ask them, why are you living with mom and dad? They say, well, it's very comfortable. She cooks stuff for me. And when I ask them, well, what do you do with your girlfriends or your boyfriends? It's not a problem. I can bring them home. And I said, well, is that the high point of your ambition, that your girlfriend and you're upstairs in a bedroom while mom and dad are watching television? I think it's a bizarre development.
Well, okay, then let me ask you, in the book you talk about coming of age in the universities in the 60s and the 70s, and you talk about the activism then. But are you just trying to replicate your experience as a child? And you're now at an age where, are you just nostalgic for your past and you want the world to be the way it was when you were growing up?
Well, there's always a danger that we become caricatures of ourselves and merely sort of want to rediscover the past in the future. And I really hope that's not what I'm doing, because as a sociologist, I know that history never repeats itself, and experiences and cultural norms always mutate and change. So it's impossible to imagine that the 1960s are going to come back, 10 or 20 years down the road. But what I'm really concerned about is not to rediscover my generation. What I'm really concerned about is the fact that within universities, a very illiberal ethos has become institutionalized, where for the first time, since the modern era, a growing number of young people actually think that freedom is not a big deal, and they are quite, sort of upfront about it. They are in your face when they say, "Well, what's the big deal about freedom or free speech? Why are you going about academic freedom? So what? So what if we censor somebody from saying something that's offensive? So what if a certain academic is forced to watch their word? That's a small price to pay for us being comfortable." And when you have that kind of acceptance of this kind of semi-totalitarian impulse towards closing discussion down, that is really worrying for me.
Particularly at the university, as you were saying, because that's the one place you could see that in a workplace maybe, but the whole idea of the university is that that's where that happens.
That's right. And it's interesting how powerful it is. A friend of mine who's Hungarian was invited to go to Florida to give lectures on the Hungarian Holocaust. And he's totally unaware of what goes on in universities. And he's showing a picture of Auschwitz. And basically, the picture shows a woman before she got to Auschwitz, a beautiful Jewish woman in 1939. And then shows a picture of the same woman, sort of skin and bones, after Auschwitz, but looking almost like a corpse. And this woman in the auditorium cries out, "Stop it, stop it. I came here to hear a lecture on the Holocaust." And I'm offended and everything else. So my friend just looks at her and says, "Well, actually, this is a lecture on the Holocaust. And, what did you expect? Sort of a Disney representation of a fairy tale." And he thought that was the end of the matter.
Yeah.
A day later, he gets called in by the dean and says, "This is not how we do things in our university." And he gets basically reprimanded for discussing a disturbing theme.
Right.
And if we come to that point where you can't even discuss the Holocaust as the Holocaust, but you got to have a Disneyfied version of it, then we are in big trouble.
You've identified the problem. You've discussed some of the root causes and the development over time and the effects of it. What are the means of redress? What can we do to kind of force the universities and society to become more mature?
Well, I think that's a really big problem, because there isn't a simple answer for that. I think Universities need to take ideas a little bit more seriously, because if you take ideas seriously, for example, if you think that freedom is actually a big deal, then you're far less likely to accommodate to censorious trends. You're going to stand up and be counted. We have to really go out of our way to popularize the importance of many of the elementary liberal norms, tolerance and freedom, democracy, which have become emptied of meaning at the moment. We've got to find a way of making it sound very 21st century. We have to particularly direct our attention towards young people. One of the things I've been doing in Europe is going around and talking to high school students. And I know it sounds weird being a university professor, but I find it very interesting talking to 17, 18-year-olds before they go to university, because at that point they're still idealistic. They kind of feel that they can make things happen. They haven't been kind of ground down by the university ethos that they're going to go into. And if you can somehow capture their imagination, inspire them by indicating there's a different way of looking at the world, then you can at least build up a larger cohort of more freedom-loving, more freedom-interested individuals. And there's a lot of kids like that, who are, have a lot of energy within them, and they are looking to be inspired. And very often when they go to university, they will tell you that they're being validated, and everybody flatters them, and everybody tells them how wonderful they are. But it's very rare when they get really stretched and they really feel that something positive has occurred. So that, I think all those things are really important. But I think above all, I think what we need to do is to challenge the child-rearing, socializing culture in a more systematic way. I think at the moment people are very, 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 very scared to actually make the point that children, are quite capable of agency. They're quite capable of standing on their 2 feet. We can treat them as potential adults already at a very early age. And there's no reason why the capacity for independence should not be cultivated, not when they're 45, but when they are 6.
Well, we will leave it there. We have been talking with Frank Ferretti. He's a sociologist at the University of Kent, and he's the author most recently of What's Happened to the University, a sociological exploration of its infantilization. Frank, thanks for talking to us. For Reason, I'm Nick Gillespie.
Reason TV on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Also check out reason.com. Now, we've all seen what's been going on in the universities, the colleges. Sorry, I'm bringing up this article here. We've seen the radical change in how the whole college experience, the scene, and the environment there has completely flipped around. You don't fight for free speech. You fight to shut down free speech because it offends you. That's how students pretty much have looked at it now. And now I'm looking at the political environment and the college environment. And I'm seeing what's going on with the youth coming out now, and looking at the past presidential election, the primaries specifically. And then we just had this special election in Georgia. And it was out-of-state interest spent somewhere around like 26.2 million. It was considered historically the most expensive race ran. And the Democrats poured just poured millions into this. And they were going to make it about Donald Trump. We're not talking about a national election. We're talking about a local election. But they wanted to make it about Donald Trump. We'll pour millions into it. That'll ensure that our guy wins. We'll get celebrity backing. That'll ensure our guy wins. And we'll talk crap about Donald Trump. That'll get us in there. It didn't happen. Celebrity endorsement, none of that helped. They lost. Spent millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars. And they lost. The Republican candidate won. There's two things that there's multiple things, we'll say that. One, money doesn't win the election. You know, celebrity endorsements don't win that election. Staying off topic about local problems and making it a national problem and making it about the current president. They didn't make it about any issues. And another thing, they were centrist. Remember the primaries for the presidential election? Remember that old guy? Oh yeah, Bernie Sanders. Have we also seen the environment? What, we heard on that clip? The environment in the colleges? How they supported Bernie and how old school politics aren't working anymore. Propaganda is not working the same anymore. They are desperate to win. Democrats are desperate to have power back. In a weird, fetish type way, it almost seems like it's almost like you ever see those crazy people break down, over like really dumb crap. Just start acting a fool out in the street. We've seen it during the election, just crazy, off the wall. That's what Democrats are doing right now. They're my precious, they might go full, let's just admit we're socialists. Let's just, admit this because, that's what they like. We can't play the moderate anymore. Not saying this has anything to do with the president, but during the election, people that were supporting, there were, public type figures and non-public figures that are fascist type people that were trying to help push Trump into office. Which kind of seemed a little odd, but I think what's happening, us libertarian, type people, where we're not really counted. Well, we want to, limit government, slowly, make it smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappears. Oh, well, you don't want ultimate power. We don't want to deal with you. Progressives have always wanted, power, more power, more power. But now you have the ultra extreme wings. They want to do it what at least looks like the right way to the everyday person, but they want to gain power. And they want to do it. If they get the position, they can go full radical. Unlike the old guard that will still do it slow and steady. I think you have the more fascists trying to take control of the Republican Party. I think you have the ultra socialist type people trying to take control of the Democratic Party. And I think with what they've seen with the Georgia election, money's not working anymore. Celebrity endorsements didn't help, or not at least enough. They're going to look back, and then the problem we get there is then the Republicans start losing seats because they're the Democrats are pandering to that socialist ideology, and then the Republicans will start going more towards that fascist ideology. And then for the rest of us, we're sitting back and we're going to be basically waiting to find out which side goes full, dictator. It almost seems like we're already, been on that path, which it's because it's been a slow movement, but we know what happens with the radical political revolutionaries, the ones that they'll do it the political way. They'll at least propaganda wise make it look like they're doing it the right way, while bullying their way into power. And then once they get that position, that's when they go full dictator mode. And we're on that dangerous path already. And the old guard on the Democratic side, I don't think they want to give up power, but I think they're already losing their power, their grip, and they're not going to have a choice. And they're either going to become a part of it, or if they think that, well, I really lost any leverage I have, because now the radicals are just out and open about it, and people like it. So any leverage I had or have, I don't have it anymore. I'm going to get out of here. I don't have power anymore. Not only that, I helped create a system that might now turn around and lock me up. And we've seen that happen. Really, if you want to look into depth into something that kind of shows that, is the revolution. um, over in France. When the French Revolution happened, there are a lot of the people that started the revolution, helped get it going, that then became victims of the revolution. You know, there's some people out there that try to be revolution. The I'm going to be one of the leaders in a new revolution. Well, what type of revolution? Revolution of the mind, or actual, revolution? Well, if you want to be, part of that, I wouldn't even want to be, just for the simple fact, in a lot of situations, you become a victim of your creation if you're not careful. Plus, I rather see, society just go, hey, we notice it's not working. Let's, reverse course. Do it peacefully. Um, I don't think violent revolutions are ever any good for the chances of a better government or country. Um, it almost ensures that the brutal ones, the most vicious ones, make it to the top because you're fighting a violent revolution. Um, that doesn't usually turn out good. Um, sometimes it does, though. But we do live in different times. So when the next presidential election, even the congressional elections and stuff, um, watch these national elections and see what each party starts leaning towards. Look at the candidates that start popping up at the DNC and the RNC. You're going to start seeing, I believe, more radical people. And I think Donald Trump being able to be elected is proof enough that, we're there now. Simple fact that Bernie Sanders did as well as he did. And really, you can argue, if it wasn't for super delegates, he possibly could have won. And, I think someone had said that he wouldn't have won, but the whole thing about the super delegates had come out during the primaries, so it kind of slowed people from showing up. Like, he's already getting, or she's already getting all these delegates, super delegates, and he's not going to win anyway, so, why even try? We've seen that with the Ron Paul. And it's getting to a point that we need to start instilling the message and the wealth of freedom and less government. You ask people, do you trust government to take care of you? Most people be like, hell no. But when it comes to voting time, benefits that they want, they're willing to take that. treat government like the weird guy that pulls up. Hey, you want some free stuff? I got something here for you. Yeah, I'm good. Peace. You don't just take government handouts without, you know, really thinking about what you're doing. You'll get dependent on it. If they give you free handouts that softens the blow of you not working, let's say it does more than soften the blow. Shoot, now I'm getting enough benefits, I'm almost getting what I was making. Shoot, cut this and this out of the budget, I'm good. And not everybody does that. It's not saying, but a lot of people fall into that trap. I know people that have fallen into that trap. Hey, hit me up on Facebook or, you know, run into me somewhere. Hey, man, where you been? Not over at your place. Because you don't do anything. You live off of other people's money. I work. Last place I want to go is the place that the guy doesn't work or the person doesn't work and gets government handouts. Definitely when I see my tax, when I go do my taxes at the end of the year, it's just amazing. You know, definitely when you see some people's tax check that makes a lot less than you. I've seen it all. Just believe me, I've seen it all. Tired of paying for other people's stuff. We don't need to pay for other people's stuff. How about this? Just stop taking people's money. Taxation is theft. You think we're gonna have a president that'll go, hey, yeah, taxation theft. We shouldn't do that no more. Yeah, probably not. And if we get a socialist, of course not. Matter of fact, you don't get money anymore. Here's your food stamps and your gas ration. Then you're buying bootleg gas off the guy that doesn't use all of his gas ration, just starts storing it. And he's charging you way more. But he don't drive anywhere and you have to go places. Or at least want to go places. What are we going to do with the colleges? I would say that we would really prove the irrelevance of colleges anymore. There has been a lot of stuff that is taught at colleges that has been disproven. There have been a lot of people that have gotten famous and then discredited later down the road. So the relevance of a college is you know, where the best ideas always are. We hope that it is, but we don't really know. But I would say, you know, with the ability to mass communicate anymore, roundtables, discussions, experiments, there's been a lot of stuff that's been proven lately that makes liberals mad. I'm not really going to get into it. And it's even, you know, science that is coming out that I really looked at like, yeah, whatever, like you BS, and it turns out to be true. And I start looking into it, and it definitely, like, you know, for me, research I did and looking into, you know, things they quoted about science, and yeah, that's pretty true. Oh, okay. And I come to my own conclusion. And it's probably not what you're going to hear um, in colleges. Um, we are on the last half hour of this broadcast. Um, I want to play one last short clip here from We Are Change, Donald Trump's foreign policy that the media won't mention. And you know me and foreign policy, it's something I've covered a lot, and our involvement overseas, and it affects us in so many different levels and ways, definitely with the economy so entangled, and then using, you know, the retaliation for things we do overseas for reasons to take you, your family, and me and my family's rights away. I don't like that. It doesn't make sense to me. So let's get in this real short clip here, and we'll cover this for the last half hour.
As we're speaking right now, people's worst nightmares are coming to fruition with a disastrous foreign policy being carried out by the United States President Donald J. Trump. This is a very important video, especially for Trump supporters, to understand that the proxy war that has been going on for years between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Syrian rebels versus Iran, China, Russia, and the Syrian government is escalating on grand proportions. As we're speaking right now, just hours ago, U.S. coalition forces shot down a Syrian army plane in southern Raqqa. According to the Syrian government, the plane that was shot down by U.S. forces was carrying out operations against ISIS in the countryside around Raqqa when it was targeted, leading to a crash and loss of the pilot, who is currently missing. The United States issued its own statement saying that the U.S. military says that the warplane was shot down because it was dropping bombs near U.S.-backed fighters inside of Syria. But if you look at the map of where the U.S. shot down this warplane, and according to some journalists and analysis, this area was under ISIS control. And now because of that, intense clashes have broken out between Syrian army forces and U.S.-backed forces in West Raqqa. And it's important to note here, this was just done hours before the United States signed a defense pact with the Kurdish forces, who have set their eyes to attacking Syrian government forces instead of ISIS. What we're seeing here is a grand alliance between the United States, the Kurds, the Syrian rebels, and ISIS against the Syrian government, which is backed by Russia and China and Iran. This is ultimately a proxy war that's being carried out right now in front of our eyes that could become a major global conflict at any moment, especially with Donald Trump taking such aggressive actions, ultimately becoming the Air Force for ISIS and radical Islamic terrorists in the region. And after that defense pact by the Kurds was signed with the United States, they decided to make the Syrian government and Iranian-backed forces protecting the Syrian government their main sole enemy. This is on the heels of what we reported to you days ago, a video showing how the United States was allowing ISIS fighters to escape safely inside of Syria. Even with confirmed U.S. drones and U.S. air power in the skies during this exodus of ISIS from the major Raqqa city point, the United States still turned a blind eye to this massive convoy of known ISIS fighters and allowed them to retreat safely. While at the same time, just a few days ago, as we reported to you on this channel, Donald Trump decided to launch airstrikes against Iranian militias that were fighting ISIS. It is very clear who Donald Trump decided to take sides with, and it is with radical Islamic terrorists, allowing them, giving them safety, and attacking the people who have the greatest chance of defeating them. Now, I know many people in alternative media coin the term that CNN is ISIS, but from what I've been reporting to you, from every sign that I've been telling you about, that you pro-Trump people have been saying that I was wrong about, that I was just sensational, that I should give him a chance on, that he's playing 4D chess, what is ultimately happening is that Donald Trump, your supposed anti-establishment candidate, is with ISIS. It should be Trump is ISIS and not CNN is ISIS, because Trump is actually doing the things empowering these radical Islamic terrorists in the Middle East, allowing them to win and protecting them. And the scary part is we don't see this mentioned either in the alternative media or even in the U.S. mainstream media, which is hell-bent on attacking Donald Trump, but won't bring up this important news, won't connect the dots like we have been on this YouTube channel, and tell you from the very beginning since Donald Trump took office that he is personally helping the spread of radical Islamic terrorism. But if the mainstream media won't bring it up, if the alternative media that it's latched on to Donald Trump won't bring it up, we will. And this is a major significant step towards war, not only by Donald Trump, but also the Iranians who are fed up and just fired ballistic missiles at ISIS in the east of Syria. Russia is also warning the United States after shooting down this Syrian airplane, calling it an act of aggression, and saying from now on that Russia will treat U.S. jets in Syria as targets, as communication channels between Washington and Moscow have been suspended immediately after this incident. This is just moments after Russian fighter jets intercepted U.S. bombers that were flying over its border in the Baltic Sea during more NATO exercises, simulating a full all-out war between NATO and the United States against Russia. And what is Donald Trump doing in the middle of this global geopolitical disaster? Well, he's tweeting about his approval ratings. Oh yeah, and also admittedly, knowingly selling weapons to countries that are accused of funding terrorism that he himself said was funding terrorism, like Qatar.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism.
Like he did with Qatar, and then days later giving them $12 billion worth of weapons. The same goes for Saudi Arabia, which he claimed financed terrorism during his presidential bid, but now has completely aligned himself with that terrorist financing country, giving them a major weapons deal, the largest weapons deal in world history, as they commit more human rights violations, as just yesterday they killed 24 Yemeni civilians in Said. All of this with the complete support of the UK and American government working in coordination with them. And it's very important to note here, the Saudi Arabian, US, UK-led bombing campaign of Yemen is against the Yemeni forces that are actually fighting against al-Qaeda, showing you once again how the US forces are officially on the side of radical Islamic terrorism. Donald Trump has a lot of tough talk against terrorism, but in reality, not only with his weapons deals, but his foreign policy moves, he is creating them, and at the same time protecting them and preventing anyone from destroying them. This is your president with your tax dollars using the might of the U.S. military in order to undermine our national security and helping the spread of radical Islamic terrorism. This is the same president that warned us that if Hillary Clinton was president of the United States, that we would be in World War III. And now this very same man is not only doing the same, but even going further than his previous predecessor, Barack Obama, who we all know willingly started the rise of ISIS inside of the Middle East. And now Trump is following orders, continuing on the same pathway as George W. Bush, as Barack Obama, as Hillary Clinton would, and driving this country towards more meaningless war, more conflict, more terrorism, more waste of our tax-paying dollars, and at the same time not only undermining our national security, but the national security of the entire world. As the world waits for the next disastrous move inside of Syria, I implore all the Donald Trump supporters who got him into office to please wake up, see the reality of this situation, be brave enough to call it out, because it is only your praise, your adoration, your unwavering support of him that is allowing him to think that he could get away with this. Only when we stop worshiping idols and presidents and figures that we give all of our power to will we fully understand what's really happening in this world. And the true picture of this situation is that there's a bigger plan here that's being carried out regardless of who is president, that is continuing and will only continue if we don't wake up to the reality of this situation. I want to thank you guys for watching and supporting real independent media. Your donations on wearechange.org, whether they're through mail, Bitcoin, or PayPal, mean the world to us and allow us.
We Are Change, that was Luke Radowski. And, you know, this is something, again, I constantly have tried to cover, is the simple fact that you look at everything going on in the Middle East, and it's all been destabilization. That has then turned around and basically created blowback. And now we end up the ones that have to, you know, suffer consequences, but not even consequences just from the blowback, consequences that our own government, you know, will use that blowback as justification for taking your rights away. So we have to deal with it in multiple ways. And I don't really think Donald Trump is doing all this. I believe what was already told to us before, that he basically kind of untied the hands of the military. And when the military is ran by the military-industrial complex, you're going to have that. That's what happens. They're making money. For them, they're making money. So, if we have any hope, we have to understand that they're not going to stop, you know, threats from hurting you. They're not going to stop theft, rape, murder. They're not going to stop the blowback that happens too. So all you do is give up your rights for the illusion of safety. You're not giving up your rights for safety. The simple fact that you gave up your rights proves that you have no safety. Because if you truly have safety, you have safety from people taking your rights away. And for how many decades have they been using that as a justification for passing laws that restrict your rights? And has it made, you know, life better? If anything's made life better, it's been technology being able, you know, give us 2 more free hands. So once we deal with the domestic issue, then you also understand that there are people out there that are, and it's not even necessarily the soldiers. lot of the soldiers, like a lot of people around the world, they think they're doing good, or they hope they're doing good, or some of them at times kind of understand maybe I'm not doing really any good here. That causes more problems. Many people think that's why, a lot of the veterans of late, they're having so many issues. Issues like these have happened in every war, but what's the true cause of the number of veterans coming back that can't deal with it or having problems dealing with it? PTSD, whatever you want to call it now. And they go, well, PTSD was like shell shock before. Well, no, not necessarily. Not everything they label PTSD would have been called shell shock back then. Because some of it has to deal with more of depression. We were over there, we did all this, we didn't do any good, or I lost friends, I should have been able to help them. It's a lot of different issues. And I don't ever beat up on the veterans or even the soldiers. But the people running the show, they're out there basically putting your name as a U.S. citizen as like a false, signature of approval of these attacks. So you create enemies and you have blowback. And in a lot of these situations, we find out there wasn't this big cry for liberation. It wasn't there. It didn't exist the way they perpetrated it to exist. And if I can pull up this last article real quick. Maybe. This was on the American Conservative. I actually seen it at Anti-War. How America armed terrorists in Syria. Third-term Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, a member of both the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees, has proposed legislation that will prohibit any U.S. assistance to terrorist organizations in Syria, as well to any organization working directly with them. Equally important, it would prohibit U.S. military sales and other forms of military cooperation with other countries that provide arms or financing to those terrorists and their collaborators. Gabbard's Stop Arming Terrorists Act challenges for the first time in Congress a U.S. policy towards the conflict in Syria, the Syrian civil war, that should have set off alarm bells a long time ago. In 2012 to 2013, the Obama administration helped the Sunni allies, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, provide arms to Syrian and non-Syrian armed groups to force President Bashar al-Assad out of power, and in 2013 the administration began to provide arms to what the CIA judged to be relatively moderate anti-Assad groups, meaning they incorporated various degrees of Islamic extremism. That policy ostensibly aimed at helping replace the Assad regime with a more democratic alternative has actually helped build up Al-Qaeda's Syrian franchise, al-Nusra Front, into the dominant threat to Assad. The supporters of this arms supply policy believe it is necessary as pushback against Iranian influence in Syria, but that argument skirts the real issue raised by the policy's history and the Obama administration's Syria policy effectively sold out the U.S. interests that was supposed to be the touchstone of the global war on terrorism, the eradication of Al-Qaeda and its terrorist affiliates. The United States has instead subordinated the U.S. interests in counterterrorism to the interest of its Sunni allies. In doing so, it has helped create a new terrorist threat in the heart of the Middle East. The policy of arming military groups committed to overthrowing the government of President Bashar al-Assad began in September 2011 when Barack Obama was pressed by his Sunni allies Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to supply heavy weapons to a military opposition to Assad. They were determined to establish Turkey, and the Gulf regimes wanted the United States to provide anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons to the rebels, according to a former Obama administration official involved in the Middle East issues. Obama refused to provide arms to the opposition, but he agreed to provide covert U.S. Logistical help in carrying out a campaign of military assistance to armed opposition groups. CIA involvement in the arming of anti-Assad forces began with arranging for the shipment of weapons from the stocks of the Gaddafi regime that had been stored in Benghazi. CIA-controlled firms shipped the weapons to the military port of Benghazi, to two small ports in Syria, using former U.S. military personnel to manage the logistics, as investigative reporter Cy Hirsch detailed in 2014. The funding for the program came mainly from the Saudis. And you can read the rest of that article at the American Conservative. It was also up at antiwar.com in the spotlight area. Now, this is how these covert operations have been going on. You know, the whole thing that went down with, you know, the consulate there in Benghazi, it was arms running. You know, when we talked about it, it was a conspiracy. They weren't running arms, and it shortly, you know, it came out because the proof was already there. So we knew that they were running arms. But our involvement now, I wonder where the continual involvement, definitely when you have Russia over there, supposed Iranian forces, what good's going to come out of this? Nothing. We need to get out of the Middle East. Thank you all for tuning in. Go to UCY.tv, click that support tab or that Amazon button and help support UCY.tv, and stay tuned here. Great broadcast coming up after this. And also check out My Patriot Supply. If you go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot, you can get great deals. Check them out.
Hey, this is JJ